Tonight, we won't open dusty chronicles to list the names of kings or trace the borders of empires. Instead, we'll step into a land where the map itself goes silent, a continent locked beneath white walls of wind and ice. Here, the horizon is not a line but a question, curving away under skies so pale they seem borrowed from another planet. The air moves like a patient sculptor, sanding the mountains, polishing the frozen plateaus, carrying secrets older than memory. Beneath this quiet weight, rumors sleep in layers of blue ice, of cities that never saw the sun, of stone shapes glimpsed in satellite photos, of warm corridors carved where no one should be walking, so lower the lights. Let the cold breeze softly against your thoughts, and if your mind begins to wander through this frozen hush, following the faint trail of mystery beneath the glaciers, that's just the night carrying you with it. If journeys like this keep you company, you might consider subscribing, and if you share the time and place you're listening from, perhaps the next campfire will be waiting for you there. And beyond it, far beyond firelight, beyond any warmth at all, the world turns white and silent. The snow here does not fall so much as it waits, layering itself for centuries, a slow archive of storms. Beneath those layers, the ice keeps its own secrets. Some say there are shapes under there, pyramids, corridors, entire maps of a history no one remembers. Others speak of satellites catching angles and shadows that don't belong to nature. The wind doesn't argue. It simply moves across the ridges, carrying no answers, only questions cold enough to burn. Antarctica wears the world's largest hat made of ice, a cap that in places reaches nearly 3 kilometers thick. Across this frozen plateau, the katabatic winds, cold and unrelenting, sweep downhill in steady, disciplined lines toward the coast. At times, the air itself grows weary of being air and turns into diamond dust. Countless ice crystals glittering in the sunlight, each one carefully noted in weather logs with charming precision. Diamond dust, light. For centuries, the place was more rumor than geography. Medieval Mapai Mundi shaded the southern edge of the world with a speculative land called Terra Australis, essentially a cartographic hunch that the globe ought to balance. The real coastlines arrived late. Sealers and whalers sketched them between chores, as if the continent were a side project after boiling blubber. When explorers finally trudged inland, they had to learn a new household vocabulary. Snow that isn't quite snow becomes fern, which is fun to say very slowly, like you're deflating a pastry. Wing-carved ridges are sastrugi, a crossword puzzle word meaning don't trip here. Bits of mountain poking through the ice are nunataks, which sound like snacks but are not. The ice itself keeps time the way trees do, in layers, so an ice core is a vertical library. Some pages are older than most languages. The cores gossip about volcanic ash, ancient sea salt, and the day a storm somewhere else had opinions strong enough to reach the pole. Because of the cold, everything slows down to a sleepy, competent pace. The air holds little moisture, so clouds often give up before they begin. Brine sinks beneath sea ice and occasionally organizes a brinnacle, an underwater icicle that creeps along the seafloor as if the ocean were practicing calligraphy. On the surface, the coast is scalloped with polynyas, honest patches of open water that refuse to freeze and thus confuse penguins, who appreciate open water but prefer reliable schedules. Even scientific instruments take on the relaxed mood. The Neutrino Observatory at the South Pole, Ice Cube, listens for particles that seldom speak, like a night watchman who enjoys the silence and notes the rare whisper. Early stations were equally patient. One hut still smells faintly of seal oil, a scent that seems to have decided to be permanent, which is arguably an achievement in a place where even microbes shy away from the housekeeping. The 20th century added satellites, the world's laziest tourists, orbiting slowly and taking photographs of everything. The images can be crisp enough to count the shadows of a rock, and shadows are very generous narrators. Somewhere in the Ellsworth Mountains, a peak looks like a pyramid when the sun is cranky and low. It's called, with admirable restraint, Pyramid. You can understand why people who prefer brisk mysteries to careful geology would point and say, "Huh." Pixels can be surprisingly persuasive. With just the right snowdrift and the right compression, even a gentle slope begins to resemble masonry. The mind, after all, is a busy homemaker. It puts faces in clouds and straight lines on hills. On a screen, a glacier the size of a small European country becomes a neat thumbnail. You scroll, it scrolls, and another shape emerges, a rectangle, a grid, anything that looks domesticated. The word structure arrives out of habit like a guest who invites themselves. From here, it is a short shuffle to talk of civilizations lost beneath the ice. An ancient city under a frozen continent has a certain bedtime appeal, probably because the phrase, under a blanket, does so much work. The story often borrows a very old name, Atlantis, which comes from Plato, who wanted a moral fable about hubris and maritime real estate. He did not mean for it to become the longest-running property listing in history, but that is the risk one takes when writing a dialogue. Add the Orontius Phineus map from 1531, with its imaginative southern landmass, and the Piri Reis map of 1513, stitched partly from earlier charts, and you have enough parchment to keep a form thread lively. The claim says these maps show an ice-free Antarctica. The counterclaim says they show cartographers having a hard-working day trying to reconcile rumors, coastlines, and sea monsters. It turns out approximate was a popular aesthetic. One marginal note on the Piri Reis map mentions that the coastline was drawn from the tailies of Portuguese infidels, which is not exactly peer review, but it is wonderfully specific. Then there are the pyramids again, now dressed in capital letters and winter light. If you spend an afternoon with satellite images, preferably a slow afternoon, perhaps with tea, you begin to notice that pyramids crop up wherever mountains are pointy and shadows are decisive. You may discover whole suburbs of them. Geologists, notorious for their low resting heart rates, will tell you that the Ellsworth Range includes horn peaks carved by glaciers, which are happy to sculpt triangles simply by being glaciers. The same glacier that shaped a pyramid might, on a sunnier day, imitate a cathedral. To be fair, humans have decorated landscapes with pyramids before. Egypt and Mesoamerica made a habit of it, but those were built partly for visibility, while Antarctica specializes in the opposite. If there were a civilization under the ice, it would be the shyest civilization on record, with an urban plan optimized for secrecy and bedrock. The zoning board would meet briefly and then go to sleep. Of course, the 20th century also had a fondness for grand operations with complicated names. Operation High Jump officially. The United States Navy Antarctic Developments Program set off in 1946 with a fleet of ships, a small city of sailors, and a list of tasks that read like a careful exercise routine. Train personnel, test equipment, practice logistics, maybe take a few pictures while everyone is out. The ships had brisk names, the Burton Island, the Mount Olympus, the Brownson, that sound like they should be in a card game. Admiral Richard Byrd, who enjoyed Antarctica the way some people enjoy old libraries, served as a kind of honorary head. The group established a camp called Little America 4, which is the sort of name you choose when you are too tired to be poetic, but have a numbering system you trust. The operation lasted only months. The ice tested aircraft and patience. A few planes broke, the way planes will, and everyone learned again that Antarctica has no interest in schedules. Rumors attached to expeditions the way snow attaches to boots. Later retellings gave High Jump a subplot: secret Nazi bases, flying discs, tunnels into warm caverns, and perhaps a very embarrassed penguin who signed a non-disclosure agreement. The kernel behind that popcorn is the 1938-39 German survey of an area they named Neuschwabenland, where crews dropped metal pennants with swastikas and snapped respectable aerial photos of ice. The evidence of an elaborate base is rather like the evidence of polite dragons often cited, never photographed with today's newspapers. Meanwhile, actual stations were busy with dull necessities, such as keeping diesel from gelatinizing, counting seal hairs in filters, and carefully substituting powdered eggs for the idea of omelets. One American pilot compiled a list of wind directions that sounded like someone reading slowly around a compass, which is exactly what it was. Even the diaries are a matter of fact. One entry, I am not making this up, spends a full page discussing the proper storage of mittens. When people ask why certain areas are off limits today, the answer is largely bureaucratic and therefore sleep-friendly. The Antarctic Treaty System, which arrived in 1961 with the energy of a tidy roommate, limits activity to peaceful science and insists everyone share their toys. Within the treaty live smaller rules, Antarctic specially protected areas, which are to penguin colonies and delicate lichen, what velvet ropes are to small museums. Some zones are restricted because aircraft frighten wildlife. Others because the ice hides crevasses like unhelpful surprise parties. There are places where magnetic anomalies sulk and make instruments indecisive, and places where a storm decides to sit on the landscape for a week, perhaps out of principle. A few sites are naturally intriguing, like Vostok, buried beneath approximately 4,000 meters of ice. Comes to mind, but access there involves cleanroom techniques, decontamination debates, and an attitude toward patients that would make a monk proud. The conversation about theories versus hoaxes feels busy on the internet, but rather drowsy in the lab. Glaciologists are comfortingly fixated on things like basal shear stress and accumulation rates, which are phrases that induce naps in a delightful, ethical way. Radar pulses go down, bounce off layers, and return to the oldest possible gossip. The signal says, this is bedrock, this is water. This is ancient snow experiencing a long, quiet squeeze. When researchers drill an ice core, they label it in centimeters, log the latitude to multiple decimals, and then celebrate by carefully doing nothing dramatic. Meanwhile, enthusiasts present grids of pixels and say, with convincing font choice, that the snow looks intentional. You can appreciate both arts, the patient consideration of layers, and the human wish that patterns are trying to get our attention. The Earth is full of genuine mysteries, subglacial lakes, microbial communities that treat antifreeze as a hobby, wind so dry that wooden dog sleds from a century ago still look ready for a stroll, and it is also full of shadows that look persuasive at a resolution of 72 dots per inch. Some hoaxes are almost affectionate. Photos are mirrored accidentally on purpose. Captions are upgraded. A return, the Filkneron ice shelf is sent to a new address and given a backstory involving doors. Occasionally, a routine maintenance building near a runway becomes, with only minimal effort, a forbidden facility. Scientists whose day includes repairing a snowmobile and coaxing a data logger back to civilization wake up to find themselves cast as guardians of ancient vaults. You can imagine their disappointment at being assigned a cool role in a narrative without receiving any cool props. The most secret thing most of them have seen is a mislaid spoon, and yet the contradictions are oddly soothing. Antarctica encourages slow thinking. If answers arrive, they come at the pace of snowfall, which is millimeters per year, a work rate favored by stalactites and careful editors. Even the maps tell a gentle joke. The Orontius, Phineas, and Piri race charts are beloved because they whisper that someone knew more than they admitted. But the humor is in the margins. Monsters nibble at ships. Wind roses twirl politely. The southern landmass resembles a freshly ironed napkin, carefully tucked beneath the world. Cartographers were not clairvoyant. They were completists. They filled blankness with best guesses the way we fill grocery lists with something for breakfast and trust our future selves. In a similar vein, Victorian atlases show Phantom Islands, Sandy Island, Doherty Island spots that kept being reported by sea captains who were perhaps bored or perhaps very convinced by fog. The phantom islands have since vanished into the satisfaction of being corrected. Antarctica happily remains. Large, patient albino on the map, wearing a crown of cold fronts and a very heavy hat. If there is a city beneath the ice, it is probably microbial, and it probably measures itself in microns rather than avenues. The roofs are made of ice crystals that melt and refreeze, and the plumbing is brine winding through channels like the doodles of a distracted student. The citizens do not object to low light. They attend long, quiet meetings and vote unanimously to continue. In the meantime, human cities visit briefly, stack snow blocks against the wind, and leave behind bamboo marker poles that migrate slowly as the ice flows. Old camps reappear at the surface like badly buried memories. A box of raisins left in 1962 achieves immortality. There is a certain humility in realizing that the most permanent human architecture at the South Pole might be a note written in pencil on a wooden crate. Science and conspiracy both like big feelings, but Antarctica is stubbornly literal. The ice falls downhill. The ocean freezes, then thaws, then freezes again, as if it enjoys routines. Emperor penguins traipse to the sea and back with an air of professional obligation. A satellite passes at the same time every day, reliable as a bus driver. On a calm morning, when the sun loops low and the air holds still enough, you can hear the ice shift, a sound like distant furniture being nudged across the floor. This is not a revelation, it is maintenance. If the continent is keeping secrets, they are the type kept by libraries. Everything is there, simply stored in a format that requires patience to read. So we circle back to the sleepy question: could the truth be stranger than fiction? It usually is, but not in the way fiction hopes. The truth is that Antarctica, cold and deliberate, archives the planet. Snow remembers air. Rocks remember where continents bumped into one another when the world were a different arrangement. The sea ice records, in ring after ring, the faint breaths of summers and winters. If a lost civilization had chosen this as a home, it would have moved in very slowly, taken one look at the energy bill, and left a politely worded note declining the lease. If visitors from somewhere else have been here, they have not filed a change of address form. The explorers we can verify brought wooden huts and a remarkable enthusiasm for pemmican. The only pyramids anyone has measured are mountains with very tidy angles. If you're still here, adrift in the soft glow of a screen, perhaps wondering whether a ridge is really a wall, you are allowed to let the thought idle. The mind keep a few mysteries the way a pocket keeps a paper clip light, unnecessary, oddly satisfying. In the long polar night, when the aurora unspools like patient handwriting, the continent does not mind our speculations. It is busy being exactly what it is. Snow falls quietly. The wind arranges it. Somewhere beneath several thousand meters, a lake dreams in the dark, not quite frozen, older than empires, perfectly content. We can keep talking about hidden cities if it helps you drift. I will lower my voice and count, not sheep, but sastrugi. One long ridge, another a third, each with its own shadow, each pointing toward the same unhurried horizon. You might not expect a place made of almost nothing but ice and wind to have such a lively rumor mill, but Antarctica is a very quiet stage with excellent acoustics. The continent sits there like a white page, the size of a country you can't fold, and everyone projects onto it. Cold air slides downhill in tidy sheets, the sun circles lazily in summer, and then forgets to show up in winter, and the ice cap hums the long, low note of glacier creep. If you're still awake by the time I finish admiring the vocabulary of snow, feel free to subscribe, or don't. I'll never know, and the penguins certainly won't file a report. We can just drift together the way Spindrift drifts, sidelong and unhurried, across a very long afternoon. The first detail to hold in your hand, very loosely, is that Antarctica is technically a desert. It is the world's largest arid postcard, mailed to itself for safekeeping. Precipitation is stingy there. Fine crystals that tinkle more than they fall. The charming diamond dust that weather observers note with the seriousness of accountants counting glitter. Far inland, the ice is 2 or 3 kilometers thick, which is less like a skating rink and more like a layered cake baked by a patient planet. Each winter lays down a thin page. Summers press the book a little harder. The story accumulates in whispering strata. Walk across that interior, and the vocabulary of the ground changes as politely as museum labels. Powder becomes fern and hardens toward ice, and the surface reorganizes itself into sastrugi wind-carved ridges that look like the desert borrowing a fountain pen. On a still day, you hear your breath, and, if you listen long enough, the occasional snap from a crevasse roof, adjusting itself like nearby furniture being nudged a centimeter. No hurry. Then come the eyes in the sky, circling, clicking, collecting. Satellite images give us the great sport of seeing patterns in white noise. A shadow on the side of a mountain looks decisive, almost architectural. A sun angle gets dramatic. Compression does its soft magic. And from a comfortable chair, the mind announces, this is a triangle, therefore perhaps a pyramid, therefore perhaps a civilization, therefore perhaps a secret. It is the kind of leap that makes archaeology professors rub their temples and graphic designers applaud the power of contrast. Names enter the conversation: Ellsworth Mountains, Vincent Massif, Queen Maud Land, and each one sounds noble enough to deserve a legend. Pixels are very persuasive. They rarely raise their voices. A ridge, a shoulder of rock, a nunatak, the delightful term for an island of stone sticking through ice, becomes suggestive with a little shadow. Antarctica is photogenic the way chessboards are photogenic. The simplicity invites complicated thoughts. And this is where the old stories politely knock. Pyramids beneath the ice. People like saying it. The phrase rolls around the mouth like a secret candy. We have history for this appetite. Egypt and Mesoamerica made pyramids fashionable centuries apart, on different continents, without emailing each other a blueprint. Triangles feel intentional to us, even when glaciers make them by accident while carving horn peaks out of patient mountains. So the imagination constructs an outline, a buried city under a crystalline blanket, everything preserved in the global freezer aisle, waiting for the right expedition with a very good thermos. Add the map room, a favorite scene. The Peary race chart from 1513, stitched from journeys and hearsay. The Orontius Phineas map from 1531, pressing an admirable southern landmass into the margins. Once upon a parchment, the world was drawn with confidence and sea monsters. The margins confide that this coast came from Portuguese infidels, and that coastline from travelers who arrived with opinions. It's all wonderfully human, guesswork with decorative scrolls. Legends of a lost continent were doing laps long before field camps sprouted on the Ross Ice Shelf. Terra Australis, the balancing land, appeared on Renaissance maps partly because cartographers disliked asymmetry. Balance the north with the south, they thought, like a mantelpiece arranged with 2 candlesticks. Antarctica eventually turned up rather smugly, as if to say, you were right for the wrong reasons, which is the sort of comment a continent can afford. Meanwhile, the idea of Atlantis wandered in from Plato's dialogues, meant as a moral fable with flood insurance, and settled like a cat in the armchair of pop history. The distance between dialogue about hubris and documentary about ruins under the Weddell Sea is measured not in kilometers, but in enthusiasm. Somewhere in the middle sits the pleasant truth that human beings enjoy stories in which old things were greater than we are now, and they enjoy them most at night. Then the 20th century marched in wearing acronyms. Operation High Jump, already a name begging for footnotes, sailed south in 1946 with 13 ships, a few 1,000 personnel, and a to-do list that read like a gym circuit for the U.S. Navy. Test equipment, practice logistics map as you go. Don't lose anything important to the weather. Admiral Richard Byrd, who had a long-running friendship with the latitude lines, provided leadership and a useful autograph. Planes flew, some landed, some did not. The wind bullied the schedule. The ice asserted the local rules. The whole affair lasted months, not years, and produced photographs, training records, and an enduring idea that something more theatrical must have happened because the name was just too good. Conspiracy is very economical with stage sets. It can reuse a single white horizon for any plot. German expeditions from 1938 to 39 add seasoning, a region christened Neuschwabenland, metal pennants thrown from aircraft like very severe confetti, and crisp aerial photographs that later brochures misfiled under mystery. Rumors are excellent travelers. Give them skis and they reach the pole ahead of the logistics team. In some tellings, High Jump fought mysterious aircraft. In others, secret bases tunneled beneath warm caverns, as if the ice cap were merely a heavily frosted roof. The sober paperwork is less cinematic. Maintenance logs, fuel tallies, notes about cooling diesel so it would flow, and occasional reflections on the correct number of socks. The diaries have a soft comedy. One entry spends half a page evaluating the virtues of powdered eggs that refuse to be persuaded into omelets, which is not the recipe the public wanted, but is the recipe the climate allowed. Meanwhile, actual restricted zones exist for reasons that look suspiciously like common sense. Wildlife does not like being buzzed by aircraft. Historic huts should not be trampled. Crevasses behave like unmarked trapdoors. Add the Antarctic Treaty System in 1961 for peaceful purposes only, and you get a landscape of rules that mostly protect penguins from our curiosity and us from our optimism. Why, people ask, is this area off limits and that one and the other? The dull answer is delightfully restful, because science wants clean experiments, because countries agreed to keep the place boring, because a snow bridge can look like salvation until it remembers it is air with ambitions. Antarctica contains specially protected areas with long names and longer permit forms. A few of them shelter lichen communities that would lose an argument with a boot. Others cover seal haulouts or bird rookeries neighborhoods that object to overenthusiastic tourism. There are also honest mysteries of the sensible kind. Lake Vostok sealed under roughly 4 kilometers of ice impossible to visit without bringing an accidental picnic of microbes. Blue ice fields where old ice resurfaces like a geological memory. Dry valleys whose winds are so dehydrated that mummified seals wander inland and forget to decay. If you wanted a secret base, you would pick somewhere with better heating. If you wanted secrets, you would measure snowfall. The modern conversation splits like a trail at a snow fence. On one side, scientists methodically extend acronyms: GPR for ground-penetrating radar, SMB for surface mass balance, VHF for the radios that complain at 3 in the morning. They push metal rods into the snow, record how fast they sink, scribe quiet graphs. Their slides contain modest bullets, such as basal shear stress estimation improved. On the other side are videos with persuasive fonts and pleasant music that zoom into a satellite image, circle a triangular shadow, and cut to a voice that says, "With comforting conviction, you can clearly see." It is an aesthetic disagreement more than a moral one. One community prefers decimal places and error bars. The other prefers adjectives and the thrill of maybe. In between, plenty of cheerful people manage both. They publish on snow accumulation and still enjoy a good campfire story about maps that knew too much. Some hoaxes are almost adorable in their thrift. Flip a photograph left-right, call the same ridge from another angle, and you have renovated the scenery. or post a maintenance building with lights on and earn a caption that says Forbidden's facility, as though the most secret work on Earth involves defrosting pipes. Move a set of GPS coordinates a few decimals, perhaps through enthusiasm, perhaps through keyboard fatigue, and watch a perfectly ordinary nut attack become a screaming headline. The longer you look, the gentler the joke becomes. Antarctica is a vast stage that looks empty in photographs, so your eyes cast the extras themselves. A human figure 50 meters away is a single pixel of stubbornness. Snow hides complexity the way a duvet hides messy sheets, effectively but not forever. If you scan enough images, everything begins to look like something else. You will find grids. You will find doors. You will find, if you are lucky, the shadow of a weather mask that resembles an obelisk wearing earmuffs. The older, quieter strangeness is less theatrical and more convincing. Consider the Brenicle, sometimes called the ice finger of death, which sounds dramatic until you watch it form like underwater handwriting cold. Salty plume descending from sea ice, freezing the water around it into a hollow icicle that crawls along the seafloor. Consider the singing of Weddell seals, electronic arpeggios composed by an animal that looks like a gentle beanbag. Consider the ice cube neutrino observatory, yes. Neutrinos in a place that cannot be more plural about ice listening for particles that hardly acknowledge matter while the aurora draws its long cursive in the sky. None of this needs a secret city. It reads like a planet quietly flexing its range. If fiction insists on pyramids, geology offers a compromise. Horn peaks whittled by ice, so symmetrical that you want to congratulate the glacier on its drafting skills. Scientists versus conspiracy theorists is a tempting boxing poster, but in practice, the scene is more like adjacent reading rooms in a library. In one, people argue gently about calibration. In the other, a whisper proposes that a photograph proves masonry. The librarian, who is the weather, shushes everybody equally. The Antarctic Treaty keeps the rules on the wall. Share your data. Keep your soldiers at home. Clean up after yourself. Don't touch the penguins. It's hard for a villain to monologue in 15-knot wind wearing a face mask that turns breath into frost. The real dramas are domestic. A generator that sulks, a storm that reschedules Tuesday to Thursday, a crate that says dry goods, but turns out to contain nothing anyone needed, heroically. Could the truth be stranger than the fiction? Usually yes, but sideways. Buried lakes sit unfrozen under pressure. Microbes treat brine channels and sea ice as neighborhoods with very small mail. Colored plumes iron, algae stain the edge of glaciers like watercolor accidents. Old dog sleds and historic huts still look serviceable because cold is an excellent archivist. In a century, the continent has cheerfully preserved ginger biscuits, photographs, and the mood of a room where someone once took off their boots. If a civilization wished to hide forever, it could choose worse faults than a kilometer of ice. But civilizations are talkative. They leave trash, pottery, and arguments about zoning. The ice, which keeps secrets only because it does everything slowly, would have archived them the way it archives ash from distant volcanoes. We would have drilled, eventually, into a broken amphora, a street plan, a stub of a column. What we keep finding instead is air, ancient and tidy, in bubbles the size of pinheads, the world's smallest museum of climates. There is a polite way to hold both thoughts at once, to enjoy the game of what if, while letting the simple habit of snow have the last word. What if a straight line on a satellite image is a building? It might be the edge of a crevasse field catching late light, which is a building the way a cloud is a cathedral. What if an old map knew a coastline we only confirmed later? It might be that map makers were good at averaging rumors, or it might be that pen flourishes resemble bays when viewed with optimism. And what if, just to keep a candle lit for your inner 12-year-old, the ice did shelter something astonishing? Then the best way to meet it would still be boring. Permits, clean drills, sample bags, data repositories, a paper with 20 authors, and a title that begins with an acronym. So the continent continues, serene and literal. The katabatic winds do their housekeeping. The sea ice rehearses its seasonal play, freeze, crack, raft, no, every year with the same sign lines. Emperors march to the water like dignified commuters. The sun nibbles the horizon, too polite to set abruptly. Somewhere a generator mutters. Somewhere else a meteorological balloon flutters upward, carrying a little package of curiosity. If you're keeping track of hooks, here is one more. On a particularly clear night, you can hear the ice shelves flex as tides pass, the sound a long baritone creak that never resolves. It is the opposite of a conspiracy, everything announcing itself slowly. If you're still awake, good. If you're not, that's fine too. We can leave the imagined city where it lives best in self-focus, under a blanket of habit and light. I'll keep listing small truths until your thoughts start to snow. There is a word, non-attack, for a rock that never learned how to be covered. There is a word, fern, for snow deciding to become ice. There is a word, polynya, for a stubborn patch of ocean that insists on being water. There's no official word for a rumor that finds the right angle of sunlight and looks like a doorway, but we all know the feeling. Let it glow and then dim. Let the wind comb the surface clean again. Let the page remain white and let sleep, that excellent archivist, file the rest. You might not expect the coldest, driest, windiest place on Earth to be such a busy factory for ideas, but Antarctica, with its infinite silence, gives every rumor plenty of room to echo. The continent is a gigantic white page that never quite finishes being written on, and the pen is the weather slow, steady, and not interested in punctuation. Light glances off it as if the sun were practicing scales, and the horizon pretends to be the edge of the world, even though it is only the edge of your patience. If you're still awake by the time we finish looking at how far white can stretch as a concept, you can subscribe or whisper a supportive nod, or simply let the next sentence walk past you like a careful snowshoe. I'll be here either way, tidying up adjectives. We start with the ice itself because it is the host and the decor. Antarctica is technically a desert, which feels like a prank until you remember deserts are measured by stinginess, not sand. Most days the sky dispenses glitter diamond dust so fine that it seems to pause mid-air to consider whether gravity is worth the effort. The interior is layered to a stately depth, 2 or 3 kilometers in places, not a rink but a very patient archive. Snow arrives as soft confetti. Time irons it into fern. Pressure persuades it toward ice, and the whole surface starts to rearrange into sastrugi, those wind-carved ridges that look like the handwriting of a hurried calligrapher. A boot crunches differently every few steps, as if the floor had opinions. When the katabatic winds come down off the plateau cold air, deciding it prefers sea, level their gravity-driven slide is so regular you could set a metronome by it, provided the metronome wears mittens. Out near the coast, the sea freezes into a seasonal terrace with neat cracks that resemble the planet practicing geometry. Polynyas, which are stubborn pools of open water arranged by ice, keep appearing like punctuation marks the ocean refuses to leave out. The aurora, ever the show-off, hangs long curtains across the dark and then folds them again. The sky's version of laundry. Stand there long enough, and you begin to hear the place. A sharp, far-off report from a crevasse roof adjusting itself. The nonsense syllables of snow grains shuffling in the wind. The abrupt comic thud of your own breath frosting on your scarf. It is all very gentle until it isn't, and that is part of the charm of a museum where the exhibits occasionally creak to remind you they are alive. Then we lift into the satellite view, where the conversation always gets lively. An orbiting camera glances sideways across the mountains, the sun sits low and throws emphatic shadows, and suddenly your screen shows confident triangles. A nun attack an island of rock, poking through the ice plays the role of a roof. The ridge of an eroded horn peak impersonates intention. From a soft chair with tea cooling to exactly the wrong temperature, you can convince yourself that the glacier's sculpting is deliberate. It's an honest kind of pareidolia. The brain squints, draws a line with a ruler it just invented, and says, yes, that is a pyramid. Probably with stairs. The pixels themselves never raise their voices. They just sit there, agreeable, while our imaginations rearrange them into floor plans. This is where the older stories arrive, wrapped in comfortable certainty. People will tell you there are pyramids beneath the ice, that a city dozes in the freezer aisle, and that one day, perhaps next Tuesday, always next Tuesdays, someone will unbutton the snow and reveal streets with names. The nice thing about triangles is that they do not argue. The nice thing about geology is that it takes its time. Glaciers carve symmetries the way a diligent child sharpens pencils, patiently and with gusto, and the resulting ridges look suspiciously well-intentioned. Human minds like intention. Glaciers offer repetition. It's a very cordial misunderstanding. Maps pull up a chair too, because a good legend likes company. The Peary Race map from 1513, stitched together from voyages and conversations and a certain amount of confidence, includes a southern coast whose exactness has been admired and debated into exhaustion. A few decades later, Orontius Phineas drew a southern continent with pleasing curves and labeled bays, as if the pen were enjoying itself. Renaissance cartographers believed in balance. If the North had land, the South should as well, for symmetry's sake and for the tidy feeling of not wasting paper. Terra Australis existed on vellum long before it could host a weather station. Meanwhile, Atlantis kept working the room from Plato's Dialogues, a moral fable that found second careers in armchairs and documentaries. It is soothing to imagine great things swallowed by water or sealed by ice. It reassures us that the present is only the present because the archive is locked. The actual past is quieter, but in its way more interesting. Antarctica has worn other costumes. In deep time, when continents were jigsaw pieces doing a slow dance, this white place sat in the temperate lap of Gondwana and hosted forests that now exist as fossils with polite names. Glossopteris leaves left their signatures. Fragments of ancient beach hint at greener moods. There were days when the sky's biggest problem was too much warmth rather than too little. The ground remembers, even if it prefers not to chat about it. Somewhere a researcher brushes a rock and finds the imprint of a leaf that does not know how to be cold. It is not a doorway to a buried city, but it is a very courteous way from a season that ended a long time ago. Now we wander into the 20th century with its enthusiasm for acronyms and logistics. Operation Tabarin, a British wartime effort with a name that sounds like a dance, built small bases in the 1940s to keep an eye on weather and geopolitics. Not long after, Operation High Jump 13 ships, aircraft, several thousand personnel, and exactly the sort of title that will misbehave on the internet arrived to map and test and practice the complex art of not breaking in the cold. Admiral Richard Byrd, veteran of high latitudes and calm signatures, presided. Aircraft took off, some landed with dignity, others negotiated harder. The wind, which is the true administrator, stamped many forms, denied, and a few come back later. The expedition lasted months and produced what large expeditions usually produce: photographs of heroic snowdrifts, careful notes about fuel lines that disagree with warnings, and the discovery that powdered eggs, when properly prepared, can still manage to be theoretical. German activity from 1938 to 39 is often recruited for drama. The catapult ship Schwabenland launched flying boats to photograph a slice of Queen Maud Land, later called Neuschwabenland, and there were metal pennants dropped on the ice to mark presence impressive for a brochure, less useful for a conspiracy. Weather stations matter to navies in the ordinary way. Barometers matter to gardeners. The archive from that period includes aerial mosaics, measured tones, and the occasional photograph that will later be captioned "Mysterious Structure" after being asked to play a role it did not audition for. Meanwhile, the French built Dumont d'Urville. The Americans assembled Little America bases on the Ross Ice Shelf like very cold flat packs, and the Australians skied methodically in from Mawson Station, cataloging rocks with a level of courtesy you'd expect from librarians. Hidden bases and restricted zones make excellent chapter headings, and Antarctica does have both, mostly for reasons that are beautifully boring. Wildlife needs quiet and distance. Historic huts need visitors who remember not to touch anything, including the fruitcake. Crevasses want you to miss them until the last possible second. Add the Antarctic Treaty System, which in 1961 declared the continent dedicated to peace and science, and you get a remarkable administrative mood. Countries agree that this place shall remain spectacularly dull on purpose. There are specially protected areas where lichens negotiate their lives at 10 millimeters per decade blue ice fields, where ancient ice resurfaces to hand meteorites to gloved researchers like a careful Mater D, and subglacial lakes, such as Vostok, sealed under kilometers of ice that require surgical levels of cleanliness to approach. The signs read "restricted," but the subtext is, "Please let the quiet things continue their quiet work." Scientists and conspiracy theorists, when portrayed as boxers, make good posters but poor neighbors. In the day-to-day, it looks more like adjacent reading rooms. Over here, ground-penetrating radar, acronyms for snowfall, SEMBI, time series of ice velocity that resemble lullabies for data. Over there, a high-resolution satellite image, a soothing voiceover, and a circle drawn around a triangular shadow with the phrase, "You can clearly see," which is both polite and insistent. A glaciologist will spend the winter calculating basal shear stress because that is what makes the ice sheet behave. A YouTube narrator will spend a weekend describing a doorway because it photographs well. The disagreement is aesthetic more than moral. Decimals versus adjectives, error bars versus mood lighting. Hoaxes, when they appear, have a thriftiness that is almost endearing. Mirror a photo and call the two halves separate buildings. Crop a maintenance shed and call the lights anomalous activity, as if the most secret thing in the world were someone defrosting a pipe. Post coordinates with a decimal misplaced and let a normal ridge enjoy 15 minutes as a megastructure. If you scroll long enough, grid lines and satellite tiles become avenues and compression artifacts become pillars. Pareidolia loves a snowfield. Give it a jagged shadow and it will return with a floor plan. Meanwhile, the deeper, stranger truths are content to stand quietly by the door. Brinicles, the elegant icicles of salt that descend from sea ice as concentrated brine sinks crawl along the seafloor. Freezing starfish in a scene that sounds dramatic but moves at the speed of bedtime. Weddell seals sing through the ice in electronic swoops like someone practicing the theremin under a quilt. Blood falls in the McMurdo dry valleys dribbles rust-colored brine because iron plus oxygen equals drama, and no permits are required to appreciate basic chemistry. The Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory listens for particles that refuse to care about matter while auroras sketch cursive overhead. Meteorites patiently collect on blue ice runways because the wind does the sorting. None of this needs a buried civilization. All of it feels like a planet gently showing off. The conversation about pyramids beneath the ice becomes calmer if you let geology finish its sentence. Horn peaks sharpen where multiple glaciers gnaw at a mountain, leaving geometry that looks like design. Freeze-thaw weathering trims edges with a tidy hand. When the sun sits low for months, every angle becomes exaggerated, and the photograph inherits a drama the rock never intended. If one must insist on secret architecture, the ice itself is happy to audition. Pressure ridges where sea ice buckles like a slow-motion frown. Snow bridges spanning crevasses like white lies. Tabular icebergs with sides so straight they look like they were made with a carpenter's square. Nature already does minimalism with alarming competence. Old maps earn a gentler treatment too. The Peary race chart stitched rumors and Portuguese notations into a confident coastline. Accuracy wandered in and out like a cat. The Orontius Phineas map offered a southern landmass because symmetry is elegant and empty paper is tempting. Some coastlines on early maps coincide with later discoveries because sailors are good at recognizing patterns, and imagination likes to be helpful. Cartographers were human. They liked balance, ornament, and occasionally the thrill of writing a name where no one would contradict them soon. Their errors were often beautiful, which is a kind of truth in itself. Could the truth be stranger than the fiction? It usually is. It just wears quieter shoes. Air bubbles trapped in ice cores hold the handwriting of ancient atmospheres. You can read a volcano's tantrum recorded as a dust layer, the thickness of a sigh. Subglacial rivers run uphill briefly because pressure, like a mischievous plumber, can make water do odd things. The dry valleys produce mummified seals that wandered inland by curiosity and then forgot what to do next. Centuries later, they still resemble the idea of a seal. Snow petrels build nests with stones arranged so carefully you'd think they had a surveyor. And when summer arrives at the edge of the continent, the sea ice fractures into jigsaw pieces that click and clink against one another, a soft, accidental xylophone that accompanies the very slow melting of opinions. The Antarctic Treaty deserves a drowsy nod for being one of history's least noisy agreements. Countries that elsewhere compete with enthusiasm chose here to be boring together. No military bases, no nuclear tests, science for all, data shared, penguins left alone. It is the civic version of a library sign, quiet please. Scientists ramble about albedo and mass balance. They write uncertainty with pride, because it means they have measured the size of their not knowing. They misplace wrenches, compare sock strategies, and spend long evenings deciding that a tent flap should face precisely this way to displease the wind. If there were a secret city under the ice, it would have to file a logistics plan, declare its waste management, and accept that every interesting discovery eventually becomes a table in an open repository. If you are still awake, it's time to let the edges blur. Picture a line of flags marking a safe route across an ice shelf, flapping with the exhausted authority of laundry. Picture a snow tractor named with affection piston bully, Higlons, weasel moving so slowly that its progress seems theoretical. Somewhere a cook is coaxing biscuits to rise at sea level V2, which is what cooks call 800 meters when they are being polite. Somewhere else a meteorological balloon drifts up, the string making a faint zither sound that survives in memory better than in audio. The continent continues doing what it does best, making simple things complicated with time. And right at the end, where conspiracy would prefer a flourish, we will settle for vocabulary, which is better for sleep. A nunatak is a rock that refused to be covered. Fern is the halfway house where snow rests before deciding to be ice. Apollonia is a patch of open water that insists on being social. Brinicles are the handwriting of cold brine. Sastragy are calligraphy you can walk on. None of these words hides a city. All of them keep good company when spoken softly. As you drift, imagine the ice sheet breathing with the tide, very slowly, like a careful sleeper turning over. The secrets, if there are any, can wait. The continent has been waiting successfully for a very long time. You might not expect a place made of silence to be so noisy in the imagination, yet Antarctica, which is mostly wind and patience, manages to hum in people's minds like a refrigerator that everyone insists they don't hear. The continent is a long white thought that never quite finishes. It has edges that are really guesses, a ceiling that sometimes glows green, and a floor that can be 2 miles thick but still wants to move. If you're still awake by the time I finish describing the different kinds of white glare white, cloud whites, know that has ideas white, feel free to subscribe or just nod into your pillow. I'll assume the nod means yes or maybe, or please continue explaining snow as if it were a personality test. The surface is simple at first glance, like a blank page that is secretly a palimpsest. Snow falls as confetti and is pressed into fern, a lovely word that feels like a yawn. Given enough time, fern becomes ice with opinions. The wind combs it into sastrugi, which are ridges that look like handwriting when the pen is in a hurry. On calm days, the sky sheds glitter diamond dust so fine that it hangs in the air to think about its choices. The cold is industrious rather than aggressive. It removes moisture from the air until Antarctica qualifies as a desert, which is something you can tell your brain and watch it protest quietly. A desert with penguins, a desert with snow. The kind of desert that prefers to be addressed formally. The edges are busy with their own chores. Sea ice grows and retreats with the seasons like a beard, leaving tidy polygons and leads that form straight lines as if the ocean had taken up geometry. Polynyas open like punctuation marks. Here and there, an iceberg leaves the shelf with the patient confidence of a book being returned to the sea's library. A tabular bark can be as flat as a rule and as tall as a memory. During winter, the aurora drapes green curtains across the sky and then rearranges them for effect. It is theatrical, but in a northern hemisphere tired way, and the applause is a distant cracking sound as the ice readjusts its posture. The interior is a different conversation. Katabatic winds roll down from the plateau, gravity deciding it can be helpful, and the air slides toward the coast because down is a compelling argument. The sound is a low hiss that you feel in the ribs. Temperature performs tricks. Spit thrown from a cup can freeze before it remembers how to fall. A breath fogs, then turns to frost on the edge of a scarf with a soft, informative crunch. There are places, dry valleys, where snow and ice are rare, and the ground is so dry that a seal can wander inland and become a natural museum label for centuries. It is all very gentle until you notice it has been there longer than stories, and then it becomes impressive, which is the same thing as gentle, just with a little bow. From orbit, the continent pretends to be simple again. A satellite camera glances across a slope at a low sun and discovers triangles. Nunataks, those islands of rock peeking through the ice, cast theatrical shadows. Ridges sharpen into confident lines. Your brain, which likes to be helpful, fetches a ruler and announces pyramids. It is a fair attempt. Glaciers enjoy carving horn peaks where several of them nibble at a mountain. Freeze-thaw weathering trims edges until they look tidy on a cloudy Tuesday. The photograph is calm about it, but humans are warm and imaginative, and triangles are the friendliest of shapes. This is where the old stories put on their coats and step outside. People have suggested, very politely or not, that there are pyramids beneath the ice. Some say a city sleeps there, arranged with avenues, waiting for us to knock. The idea is soothing in the way organized closets are soothing. A civilization might be tidier than a glacier, but the ice sheet is an archivist. It files everything by pressure and time. It insists on chronological order. It does not draw maps to amuse us. Those triangular shadows on satellite images have a deep love of geology. They are satisfied with that relationship and require no additional backstory. Maps, which also love stories, join the conversation with enthusiasm. The 16th century Piri Reis chart is brought out like a lucky coin. It stitched together older sources and sailorly gossip into a southern coastline that some find suspiciously accurate. The Orontius Phineas map did something similar with greater confidence and a lot of decorative curves. Renaissance cartographers believed in balance. If the North had land, the South deserved some for symmetry. Terra Australis appears on parchment because the paper looked empty without it, the way a wall calls out for a painting. Atlantis, which is mostly an excellent reminder to behave in Plato, quietly found part-time work as a job reference for any continent-sized rumor. Deep Time, which declines to hurry, says Antarctica was once warmish. Back in the Gondwana days, when continents practiced long-distance relationships, there were forests here. Fossil leaves of Glossopteris sit in rocks like pressed bookmarks. The ground has opinions that are older than the ice. It remembers rivers and trees and the fact that sunlight can be friendly. When a researcher finds ancient pollen in a core, the present pauses to let the past finish its sentence. One can imagine a valley with summer, and that is enough of a story for bedtime. The 20th century arrived with acronyms, which are the lullabies of bureaucracy. Operation Tabarin, a British wartime project with a name that suggests dancing, built bases to watch the weather and each other. Later came Operation High Jump, a U.S. expedition of amazing logistics, 13 ships, aircraft, and several thousand people discovering what cold does to ambition. Admiral Birdsman mapped, measured, repaired, and learned the regional dialect of creaking. Their diaries include superb descriptions of powdered eggs, which remain powdered even after introduction to water. One aircraft was damaged. Many gloves were misplaced. Everyone had opinions about wind direction that sounded very scientific and were also a little personal. Germany S 1938-39. Schwabenland expedition joined the file with catapult launched. Flying boats and aerial photographs over Queen Maud Land. They dropped metal pennants to say hello to the ice, which did not leave back. Later, the pictures became guest stars in documentaries as evidence, a job they did not apply for. After the war, bases grew like careful mushrooms. Little America on the Ross Ice Shelf, Mawson Station along the coast, Dumont d'Urville with its penguins reading the weather. A visitor's guide would have recommended goggles, patience, and respect for the word crevasse, which in person looks like a mistake the Earth made and then forgot to fix. Restricted area is a phrase that makes good television, but in Antarctica is usually a courtesy. There are zones set aside for penguin colonies that do not appreciate surprise. Historic huts that need to be left exactly as they are, fruitcake included, and crevasse fields that welcome exactly no one. The Antarctic Treaty System, an agreement so sensible that it becomes almost boring in a comforting way, declared the continent for peace and science. No military bases, no nuclear testing, and international cooperation that reads like a polite email. It is the world's longest running group project where everyone agrees to be dull and thorough for the greater good. Still, rumors enjoy cold weather as much as anyone. Hidden bases are easier to imagine when the wind covers tracks each night. A warehouse roof, half buried in drift, looks mysterious from a certain angle, especially if you squint and draw a circle on your screen. A maintenance hatch becomes a doorway. A radar dome adopts the lifestyle of a secret. Then the summer sun shifts, the drift rearranges itself, and the doorway returns to being a shadow. The camera never lied. It just waited for us to finish inventing. Scientists and conspiracy theorists share a quality that is inconvenient. Both are tenacious. The difference is their favorite tool. A glaciologist loves error bars, those quiet little shepherds that keep conclusions from wandering. A theorist loves adjectives, sturdy, expressive furniture for rooms without windows. On one side, ground-penetrating radar sweeps across the ice, colorful profiles revealing layers bent by flow, a careful record of snowfall stretching back tens of thousands of winters. On the other, a confident voice explains that you can clearly see a corridor if you choose to. Both views are tidy in their way. Only one comes with spreadsheets that wear mittens. When real strangeness appears, it does so without needing a narrator. Undersea ice, brinicles grow, a finger of supercooled, salty water snakes down and freezes the seafloor in slow motion. It looks like a fairy tale trap engineered by patient physics. In the McMurdo dry valleys, bloodfalls dribbles rusty brine because iron met oxygen and refused to calm down. Weddell seals sing through the ice in voices that sound like vintage electronics warming up. Above the plateau, The Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory listens to particles that go through everything and prefer not to leave a forwarding address. If we must whisper about other worlds, the universe is already doing that with great courtesy. Back at the desk, someone brings up pyramids again, which is fine because triangles are soothing. It helps to remember how mountains are made sharp. Freeze, thaw, repeat. Loose rock drops. 3 glaciers chew at a summit from different sides. A horn remains. Photographs, especially at a low sun angle, perform their own makeup. Shadow loves to dramatize. The human brain, which has been reading architecture since caves, treats a clean line like gossip. In this landscape, though, neatness is not design, but erosion with a schedule. Old maps deserve gentleness rather than reverence. Sailors reported, cartographers compiled, and sometimes a coastline on paper leaned toward wishful thinking. The southern continent was a balancing weight in the mind long before a ship met an iceberg. That a few curves on an old vellum sheet resemble modern outlines is both delightful and statistically inevitable. A person can enjoy the coincidence without asking the past to pass a lie detector. Hidden bases and no-go zones have explanations tethered to wildlife, weather, and history. You keep people out of penguin nurseries so the chicks don't test theories about boots. You fence off the Scott and Shackleton huts because the artifacts have survived a century and deserve another. You mark heavily crevassed glaciers because the snow bridges are white lies that should not be accepted. And you politely steer away from subglacial lakes like Vostok because drilling must be done as if the water were a guest, with elegant taste cleanly, slowly and with meticulous labels on every jar. Eventually, the conversation returns to whether the truth could be stranger than the stories. It is, but it prefers a different lighting. Consider the air bubbles trapped in ice cores, tiny archives of past atmosphere, stacked winter by winter, so neat that you could almost hear them shuffling paper. Volcanoes announce themselves as dust layers the thickness of a pause. The ice sheet rises and sinks each day with the tides like a sleeper turning over. The motion measured in centimeters, but understood in lullabies. Meteorites gather on blue ice fields because the wind is an excellent curator. The continent is already a museum. It simply prefers its labels in small print. If we must stage a debate, picture 2 rooms in the same building. In one, researchers argue politely about basal drag and accumulation rates while someone calculates with mittens on. In the other, a narrator practices saying undeniable evidence without blinking. The corridor between them smells faintly of diesel, hot chocolate, and new polypropylene. They will not interrupt one another. They will both go to bed early because this is Antarctica and bedtime arrives whenever the wind votes for it. When sleep comes closer, it helps to hold a few quiet words. Fern is snow on its way to being ice. Nunatak is rock, deciding to keep its hat above the drift. Polinia is open water, refusing to be shy. Sastrugi is calligraphy written by wind. Katabatic is gravity, remembering it can move air. None of these words hides a city. Each is a kind of lullaby, an index of how calm the complicated can be. So we leave the triangles to their shadows and the maps to their decorative flourishes. The flags along this safe route lean like librarians requesting quiet. A snow tractor named Pissin Bully moves with such dignity that progress becomes conceptual. Somewhere a cook observes that biscuits rise differently at -10 and writes down nothing at all because the recipe is a conversation. The aurora adjusts its hem. The sea ice clicks like teacups in a distant sink. The continent continues with its slow, thorough chores. If there is a secret, it is the secret of patience, how ice decides to be the long version of water, and how our stories, warmed by rooms and tea, try to keep up and yawn. You wouldn't think a place so thoroughly wrapped in ice could keep changing its mind, but Antarctica has a talent for subtle rearrangement. The winds restitch the snow, the light edits the horizon. and the ice itself sighs and moves a little each day, as if adjusting a giant creaky chair. The result, seen from far away, looks like a single idea: white, endless, quiet. Up close, it behaves more like a very slow conversation with a meticulous librarian. If you're still awake by the time I get to the part about snow that isn't quite snow fern, which sounds exactly like the word you murmur before falling asleep, feel free to subscribe or not. Either way, you can allow your eyelids to file a gentle complaint and rest where they prefer. The surface begins as something almost silly: individual crystals that decide to cooperate. They land as little six-sided essays, then stack, then compress, then become polite neighbors. Given pressure and patience, they knit into ice with a resume. Wains arrive from the interior katabatic, an excellent word for bedtime and push the air down slope simply because gravity asked nicely. The wind carves sastrugi, hard ridges that look like the handwriting of someone who learned to write on a moving ship. In a low sun, the ridges draw sharp shadows, and suddenly the plane is not plain. It is all angles, all opinions. If a satellite photographs at just the right moment, our brains, which adore triangles the way houseplants adore windowsills, will whisper, "Oh, that looks like a pyramid." The ice, pleased to be recognized as a shape, doesn't argue. From the orbiting view, the continent becomes abstract art. The satellite sensor reads texture more than substance, and small hills wear long shadows like capes. A Nunatak, just a shy piece of mountain poking through poses as a pyramid because the sun dotes on geometry. Polygon cracks spread across sea ice as if the ocean is practicing quilting. Leads open like commas in a long sentence and polinias like full stops. You can imagine a map, a city grid, tidy avenues, things that have corners and purpose. But the pattern is produced by temperature, stress, and the quiet will of ice. Antarctica is the slowest origami. It folds, it unfolds, and never has to become a crane. Of course, we are humans. We bring stories in thermoses. The suggestion that there might be structures under the ice feels cozy to the mind, like a rumor told by a friendly aunt who has a very confident voice. After all, the ice is a curtain. Curtains exist for reveals. You picture a great hall down there, perhaps, with frost-free columns and a door everyone forgot to lock. The rational part of the brain takes notes. 2 miles of ice, moving. The imaginative part raises a hand to ask whether doors can stay shut for 100,000 years if they are extremely polite about it. The answer is yes. The ice is excellent at closing things. This continent gives space to older stories, too, the kind that smell faintly of parchment. Mapmakers once believed a southern land must exist to balance the north, the way a table needs a leg at each corner. Terra Australis appeared for symmetry long before explorers complained about frozen eyelashes. Later, the Peri race and Orontius Phineas maps stitched rumor to coastline and made a shape like memory. It is pleasant to believe that someone knew Antarctica before anyone went there. In the same way, it is pleasant to think a house remembers its past owners kindly. It may be mostly wishful thinking maps are allowed to be beautiful guesses, but the idea drifts along, like sea smoke over cold water, refusing to be in a hurry. When people finally arrived with clipboards and fuel drums, they found a continent allergic to speed. Everything important happened slowly, or all at once, and then slowly again. Sledges crawled. Radios crackled. A biscuit took on the texture of masonry and still got eaten. During Operation High Jump in 1946-47, a flotilla of ships and a small city's worth of crew tried to measure and map and understand. This was an era that loved acronyms the way penguins love orderly crowds. The planes launched, the cameras clicked. A few things broke with Antarctic sincerity, and everyone discovered that cold has more varieties than ice cream. What lingered in the accounts were not secrets, but logistics, fuel that had to be pre-warmed like a shy guest, ropes that stiffened like opinions, goggles that fogged with a moral determination. The mystery, if there was one, lay in the patience required to do anything twice. Earlier, the German Schwabenland expedition tried catapult launching flying boats from a ship. The sentence itself is enough to induce drowsy respect. The aircraft skimmed the edge of a continent and took photographs that later became famous for being misunderstood. A shadow on a slope, a triangle on a ridge, a straight line where the wind had set its ruler into these went meaning like hot tea into snow. Meaning disappears quickly in such conditions, but the steam is satisfying while it lasts. After the war, bases sprouted carefully along the coastlines, huts on stilts, tanks half buried like oversized thermoses, tidy mailrooms where envelopes crackled with static and longing. Stamps traveled farther than most people ever would. Restricted zones began as kindness. Some were for penguin rookeries that do not negotiate with boots. Some were for historic huts, fragile with the history of sleeping bags and toasted cheese. Others were squares on maps with crevasses underneath, white sheets that looked innocent and had scandalous secrets about gravity. The Antarctic Treaty arrived with the calm authority of a librarian at closing time. Peace, science, and no fighting over chairs. It turned the continent into a laboratory with very slow experiments and very strong tea. If there were hidden bases, they hid mostly from weather and maintenance schedules. Snowdrifts are the original camouflage. They cover everything, including last week's optimism. Meanwhile, science, which enjoys methodically solving uncomfortable mysteries until they become comfortable spreadsheets, kept listening to the ice. Radar waves pinged and returned with news. Layers upon layers, like the pages of a book a giant has been reluctant to finish. Ice cores rose from drill holes like time capsules with good posture. Inside were air bubbles old breaths, really waiting to say that the world has been many temperatures and still learn how to keep going. A volcano here, a warm spell there, the polite cough of distant ages. To read one of these cores is to fall asleep with a calendar and wake up with a philosophy. Conspiracy, which enjoys adjectives and certainty, also kept talking. It brought satellite pictures and circles drawn in confident red. It brought narratives about corridors and cool rooms full of old light. It brought an unwavering preference for faint lines over the tiresome opinions of data. Science countered with snow density, basal shear stress, and an explanation of how sunlight at low angles is the best sculptor anyone could hire. If you listen to them in alternate evening science on Mondays, conspiracy on Tuesdays, you will notice that both are comforting in their own way. One is a neat bed. The other is a blanket fort. Both are good at winter. What's beneath the ice, in truth, is mostly more ice, with the occasional mountain range thinking deep thoughts. Sometimes there's a lake like Vostok, sealed away so delicately that any interruption has to be sterilized twice and apologized for in writing. Sometimes there's a river sliding under the sheet, moving more water than seems polite. Sometimes the ground rises into ridges that push the ice into creases. From above, it can look uncannily regular, as if an architect sketched a plan in the glacier, which cannot read, still followed the lines. Regularity, however, is one of nature's favorite illusions. Snow fences produce straight drifts. Wains reuse the same paths. Crevasses form in families. Repetition always implies design to tired human eyes. If you need actual strangeness, Antarctica provides it without any reference to cities. Under winter sea ice, brinicles descend like glassy fingers and freeze everything they meet. In the dry valleys, a waterfall the color of old iron flows from a glacier's underside in a slow, rusty sigh. Meteorites collect on blue ice because the wind has invented a conveyor belt. Weddell seals sing in a language that sounds like a retro computer attempting whale song. The Ice Cube Neutrino Observatory listens to particles that zip through the planet as if the planet were a rumor. None of these things asks to be a secret. They are content to be peculiar and measured, and written down in a notebook with a pencil warmed and a mitten dot, the old speculation about ancient. Civilization still wanders in like a curious dog. The mind pictures monuments arranged with astronomical care, avenues aligned to stars that were fashionable at the time. It's a charming image, but when glaciologists speak about flow, they mean the kind of slow motion rearrangement that would not respect urban planning. A building placed on an ice sheet becomes an anecdote told by an ice shelf. Over centuries, even stone would shrug and ask for a lift. The only durable architecture here is made by mountains, and they prefer hats of snow to any other ornamentation dot as for alien visitors. They would discover the same truths everyone else does. The wind enjoys rearranging intentions. The cold is an honest critic. The tea is better indoors. If they built anything, it would need constant shoveling. It is possible that extraterrestrials have superior snow removal technology, but if so, they have been shy about partnering with us on driveway contracts. The more generous possibility is that the universe already visits constantly, in the form of those neutrinos and cosmic rays, and that Antarctica is simply an observatory with excellent acoustics for the cosmos's quietest chorus. What we really have is a continent-sized habit of patience. The ice records, the wind edits, the light proofreads. People arrive to take notes and go home with sunburns in places they didn't know could sunburn. Periodically, a photograph makes the rounds, a crisp triangle, a suspicious line. The photograph is not lying. It is just busy being a photograph. The context is off picking up a parcel and will be back shortly. By the time context returns, the triangle has melted into a hill with an attitude, and the line has become a ridge that wanted to be seen from space for 5 minutes, and then left the party. Early dot, if there is a soft ending to this long, snowy sentence, it is that the continent doesn't need a lost city to be interesting in the sleepy way we want at night. The ice sheet rises and falls each day with the tides, like a chest breathing. Crevasses whisper when the wind brims over their lips. Flags along a safe route lean as if agreeing with one another. A tracked vehicle maimed with unnecessary enthusiasm piss and bully. Haglins trundles between buildings, while everyone waves because waving is warmer than not waving. Inside a quiet lab, a technician labels a vial of ancient air and smiles. The way you smile at a well-behaved secret you get to tell slowly dot, so we tuck the pyramids back into their shadows and the legends back into their tasteful borders on old maps. We keep the treaty and the tea and the tidy habit of measuring snowfall as if we might knit with it later. We leave a respectful gap around seals who are thinking. We remember that fern is snow midlife, that sastrugi are windscript, that katabatic is gravity in a good mood. The continent continues to be a very large version of a very simple lesson. The world is patient, and so are most truths. If a city sleeps under the ice, it is probably made of verbs like flow and settle and wait. And as you drift, you can let them do their quiet workflow, settle, wait until the rhythm of a white place that moves by millimeters has moved you too into sleep. You might not expect a continent that is mostly silence to have such a busy social life with the wind, but Antarctica keeps appointments all day long. The air sinks from the high, cold interior like a polite guest taking the stairs, and then it gallops, and then it whispers, and then it sculpts. The result is a surface that looks so simple from far away and increasingly fussy the longer you stare. A smooth white plate becomes a million tiny opinions. If you're still awake a few minutes from now, somewhere between the sentence about wind-carved snow and the paragraph about ancient maps that never met Antarctica but felt sure they remembered it, feel free to subscribe or don't. I won't know either way. You can simply let your jaw go heavy, like a glacier deciding to become a glacier, and listen as we stroll no hurry through the notion that a hidden city naps beneath the ice dot. It starts with the veil itself, which isn't really a veil so much as an ongoing negotiation between temperature and time. Snow arrives as six-sided promises, falls softly, stacks, settles, and begins to change its mind. The in-between stage, called fern, sounds like the last word you say before nodding off. Fern forgets it was snow and remembers it will be ice. Each layer presses gently on the one below, like a very large pile of quilts. If you've ever stored winter clothes and found them flatter in spring, you understand a little glaciology. Winds arrive from the plateau with a lovely name Katabatic and take gravity's side. They shave the surface into sastrugi, which are ridges hard enough to make a sledge feel like it's riding across the pages of a book written in ice. At certain sun angles, sastrugi throw shadows that look like geometry homework. Triangles appear. Parallelograms dream of being important. A satellite drifting overhead, sun low, sensor sensitive, will see a pyramid where a snow ridge only wanted to be dramatic for a few minutes. The mind joins in, delighted by shapes, because a triangle on a blank page is irresistible, and an imagined door is easier to open than a real one. This continent adores optical illusions. On sea ice, cracks spread in polite lattice as temperatures drop, a sugar cookie pattern that pretends to be a city grid. Nun-attack stone peaks poking through the sheet put on long black capes at dusk and impersonate monuments. On blue ice, where wind sanded away the snow, meteorites collect like lost buttons, and suddenly there's a tidy scatter that resembles a marketplace if you tilt your head. Anyone who has ever seen faces in the plugs of bathroom outlets knows the routine. We are very generous pattern givers. Even the word shelf, an ice shelf, invites a fantasy about books tucked underneath. Nature, uninterested in our metaphors, continues arranging curves and creases with patient mathematics. The ice moves a few meters a year, a speed toddlers would find insulting, but it moves. You could build a colonnade, and the glacier would take it for a slow walk without asking Dot, and then there are the pictures. So many pictures. Photographs taken from planes in the 1930s and 40s, in the 60s from spacecraft, in the 21st century from satellites that wink at the sun and send down enormous files full of subtle shadows. One famous image shows a cluster of triangular shapes spaced out like obedient tents. Another shows straight lines on a slope, as if a ruler had been pressed into the snow by an impatient architect. The explanation involves wind direction, grain size, melt, and refreeze. And the way low-angle light is the world's greatest exaggerator. But telling the brain, this is a shadow of a transient ridge, is like telling a child, this is a perfectly ordinary closet. The brain smiles politely and keeps imagining coat hooks with personalities. If you have ever opened the fridge and believed that the jar on the left looks judgmental, you've already met Antarctica's central trick. Everything looks like something else when the light is tired. From shadows we drift, as the mind does, into stories about what might cast them. Some people trace triangles and say the word pyramids, because pyramids are the platonic solids of human ambition. Others speak of ancient maps that knew too much. The Piri Reis map, stitched from older charts and sailor gossip in 1513, is rolled out like a carpet at a party. Someone points to a curving coast and says there. Another map by Orontius Phineas shows rivers and mountain ranges in a southern land shaped like a generous shrug. With a little hope and a forgiving protractor, Antarctica seems to appear centuries before anyone actually sulked there in wool and leather, which is a comforting idea if you like time to behave like string you can loop. The more you learn about map making, the guesswork, the hearsay, the desire for symmetry, the less scandalous it all becomes. Medieval cartographers were not secretly freezing their ink in the Ross Sea. They were doing what we do in a dark room, witches make our best guess at legends about lost continents, also enjoyed the warmth of parlors far from the ice. The blank at the bottom of the globe invited imagination. Terra Australis balanced everything, said harmony-loving thinkers who preferred their planet to have equal furniture in all rooms. A continent existed because completeness is tidy. When the real southern land turned out to be a fortress of cold that did not care for visitors or balanced arrangements, the legend did what legends do, hired a new outfit and kept going. Atlantis wandered into the conversation, then Lemuria, then more lyrical ideas about cosmic airports for travelers who needed a long, empty runway. The mind puts a city under the ice the way it puts a secret compartment in every desk. Spaces feel more charming when they pretend to hide history, which tires of rumor the way a librarian tires of loud whispers, sent ships. They brought catapult-launched flying boats, yes. Catapults and optimistic cameras in the late 1930s. The planes from the German Schwabenland expedition flew over the coast like curious dragonflies, taking photographs that became famous long after their captions went missing. During the 1946-47 Operation High Jump, the U.S. Navy arrived with ships, aircraft, fuel, sledges, diaries, and a healthy amount of institutional briskness. The official aim was to test gear and learn how to live on the world's coldest table. The unofficial result was stacks of mundane details that sound heroic when told very slowly. Fuel drums needed warming like shy guests. Snow tractors politely refused certain slopes. Pencils became fragile citizens. Cameras complained like old men about fogged lenses. When rumors later inflated High Jump into something covert and interplanetary, the surviving logbooks looked baffled. They were already dramatic, in the way paperwork always is when you're doing math while your eyelashes freeze. After the war, bases appeared like careful punctuation marks along the margins of the continent. Huts sat on stilts to escape drifts, but drifts studied maps and visited anyway. The British built along the Antarctic peninsula under the adorable name Operation Tibaran, as if the plan had a feathered hat. The Soviets planted Vostok like a flag with a serious personality in the middle of the plateau, then later discovered a lake beneath it with such gravity that everyone whispered. The Americans set up at McMurdo and South Pole stations with the confident architecture of shipping containers. Each place had the smell of fuel, the sound of generators, and a notice board that believed in string. Crews shoveled, and then shoveled again, and then paused to admire the magnificent way snow respects no human memo. Winter-over parties watched movies so often they could quote the credits. The most dangerous creature encountered regularly was a door carried by the wind. Restricted zones exist for sensible reasons. A sign might ask you not to approach a penguin rookery where thousands of Adelies are busy rehearsing their identical opinions. Another sign might protect a historic hut where food tins still stack like the pyramids of someone who forgot which was peas and which was plums. Some areas are simply dangerous because crevasses waiting under a week's snow are very bad at consent. But dots on maps also make good fuel for imagination. If a patch is off limits for safety, the mind prefers to label it secret. It is the same psychology that made every childhood closet a portal to somewhere else, despite the hanging sweaters that took up most of the portal's time. Science, which is not romantic but does enjoy long relationships, keeps asking the ice-gentle questions with radar and drills. Ground-penetrating radar pings through the sheet and returns like a bat that knows everyone's names. It reveals mountain ranges hiding with the shy enthusiasm of introverts at a party. It shows valleys and lakes and places the ice flows faster because the bedrock sighs in the right direction. Ice cores rise from boreholes like time capsules with impeccable posture. Inside are tiny bubbles of air, each a snapshot of the atmosphere from a different page in the planet's diary. Some pages smell faintly of volcano. Some mention warm spells, then go back to discussing deaths. The cores also reveal that the ice under Vostok Lake has been whispering to itself for hundreds of thousands of years without anyone dropping in for tea, which is an achievement in both isolation and etiquette. The world outside science runs on a different fuel. It prefers the grand reveal. A straight line on a satellite image asks to be a runway. A perfect triangle demands a blueprint. The brain enjoys this even as it understands scale, that a perfect triangle is a football field plus 40 stubborn yards, that the runway bends if you walk it because you're trudging across an old snow dune. Some theories summon builders from long ago with impressive winter clothing. Others invite visitors from away who prefer quiet neighborhoods near the magnetic south. There is a sweet earnestness to all of it. Secret civilizations promise the same thing as a bonus track on a sleepy album. Maybe there's more if you keep listening. Meanwhile, actual strangeness does not bother to hide. Under the sea ice, brinicles grow downward like glass icicles from a patient sky, freezing everything they touch. In the dry valleys, a waterfall the color of rust trickles out of a glacier like very slow tea. Weddell seals sing through the ice in tones that sound like an old modem learning wail. The Ice Cube Observatory listens to neutrinos tiny, uninterested travelers that pass through our planet like rumors through a crowd. Meteorites, freed from slow ice, gather politely on blue patches and wait for someone in a red parka to say, "Yes, you please." The South Pole marker moves each year, carefully because the ice slides. Even the summer light is unusual. The sun traces circles around the sky like a gold ring, deciding which finger to choose. These are not secrets. They are merely patient phenomena with an accountant's fondness for data sheets. Whenever a triangle reappears online, the quiet work has to be explained again. The explanation is always the same hymn: light angle, wind erosion, snow centering, camera resolution, the habit of our neurons to connect the dots even when the dots are not in the same room. And yet it is also always new because the triangle is new, and because the hope that there is something under the blanket survives every laundering. The Antarctic Treaty, still one of humanity's more dignified group projects, keeps the place for peace and science, and prohibits the kind of digging you might do if you were impatient to find a basement. If a city waits beneath 2 miles of moving ice, it is waiting the way a word waits inside a dictionary. You can look it up, but the page turns slowly. There is a comfort in these lone pauses. The wind comes the snow. The snow considers its options. A person in a hut warms a pencil before writing down that the temperature has dropped from cold to colder, a distinction the thermometer makes precisely and the face does not. A tracked vehicle maimed with grate, enthusiasm pissibly rumbles across a flagged route while everyone waves at the driver, because waving is warmer than not waving, and you never know when you'll see another person again. In a laboratory, someone labels a vial of air that last felt sunlight when mastodons had opinions, and they do it with the unhurried care of a librarian reshelving a favorite book. The city beneath the ice, if there is one, is very good at waiting. The continent above it is better. The argument between science and conspiracy is older than any base. Science will show you the graph, the model, the equation that behaves itself. Conspiracy will show you the photo with the circle drawn around a shadow. Science says the ice flows, the light lies a little, the wind writes with a sharp pen. Conspiracy says perhaps also a runway. Both sides pour tea. Both tell their stories in long, comforting voices. One voice uses words like albedo and sublimation. The other uses reveal and cover up. If you alternate them science on weekdays, conspiracy on weekends, you will find the rhythm almost meditative. The triangle appears. It is explained. Another triangle appears. It is explained again. The reward is in the repetition. It feels like rocking, what remains, At the end of a long, eyelid-heavy stroll across this topic is not a verdict, but a mood. The ice roof groans a little and the temperature falls. The horizon looks like the line between two pages in a huge book that nobody can lift. A flag flaps, and then the wind changes its mind, and the flag hangs like a note held too long. Somewhere, a mechanic listens to a generator with the attentive face of a doctor. Somewhere else, a penguin stares at its feet, considering its life choices, which turn out to be fewer than ours and no less sincere. And satellites, tireless and romantic, keep taking pictures of shadows and sending them to us. And we keep finding corners and corridors and the faint suggestion of a door, which is exactly what the dreaming mind wants at bedtime. Not an answer. A door dot so the hidden city remains wonderfully hidden. Perhaps because it is mostly a city of lines, our eyes draw for comfort on a white page that does not mind. The continent keeps doing the things it is very good at, moving slowly, hiding meteorites in plain sight, filing the atmosphere, teaching patience. If tomorrow brings another triangle, we will look and think of hallways, and let the explanation arrive at the unhurried speed of a snowflake learning to be fern. You can let it arrive too. The words can walk out ahead into the cold and become small. The wind can push them a little farther than seems possible. And you can set your thoughts down like a sledge at camp. Tie them to something steady and drift, while the white place under the white sky keeps all its mild, generous secrets exactly where they belong. You might not expect a place mostly made of very old snow to have real estate rumors. Yet the bottom of the world has been accused of owning an invisible city for decades. It is a quiet accusation, whispered by wind across a plain of ice so large that distances lose their confidence and start using round numbers. The continent seems blank from far away, a patient sheet, and then the closer you look, the more it behaves like a slow, complicated animal. Snow falls. It packs itself into fern, the drowsy middle stage between fluff and ice, a word that sounds like a yawn halfway finished. Sunlight skates low around the horizon, making small shadows feel important. Wind picks up the surface like a comb and leaves it in ridges with a theatrical name, sastrugi, which are essentially snow's attempt at sculpture. If you're still awake by the time I begin describing a 1947 supply list in loving detail, you can subscribe or just let that thought drift away like a snowflake deciding to be elsewhere. Either way is perfectly polite. The idea that the blankness hides angles and corridors begins with how the light works. Antarctica rarely gives you overhead sun. It prefers long, sideways light that turns every wrinkle into a confident line. A satellite passes overhead and notices triangular shadows, evenly spaced as if arranged by someone who enjoyed equilateral things. A plane flies in late afternoon and photographs stripes on a slope that look a little too straight, as though a ruler had been consulted. The mind yours mine, almost everyone's, loves a right angle the way penguins love discussing fish. We see a wedge and call it a roofline. We see a boxy patch of blue ice and think floor plan. The scientific explanation, with its patient voice, says wind direction, grain size, melt, refreeze, and the low-angle sun being the world's most excitable exaggerator. But the imagination keeps its coat on. It is already visiting an entrance. Spend an hour considering the surface, and you notice that Antarctica is very good at impersonations. Nun-attack stone peaks that poke through the ice like blunt teeth become monuments from certain angles. Pressure ridges on sea ice rise in folded walls that would not embarrass a city planner who likes drama. On the blue ice fields, meteorites collect as if someone forgot to clean up after a very small party. Even footsteps develop edges when the wind varnishes them, so that a campsite looks like it has been engraved. If you've ever stared at a tiled bathroom and found faces, you've practiced the skill required to find structures in snow. Our brains have a club membership with patterns. They will wave themselves in without knocking. Somewhere up there, a sensor translates brightness into pixels. And we translate pixels into stories. And the stories put corners where no architect has applied for a permit. From shapes it is a short, pleasant sled ride to legends. The Peary race map is rolled out on tables in warm rooms far from ice. Its 1513 coastline stitched together from rumors and sailors' memory, including a southern curve that seems to flatter Antarctica as if the cartographer had visited by accident on his way to lunch. Orontius Phineas, 2 decades later, gave the South a personality, mountains and rivers, and a certain swagger. People look at these old drawings and feel time collapse softly like a stack of quilts settling. Perhaps the mapmakers knew the continent before it wore its thick coat. Perhaps the coast was ice-free when someone's ancestor was inventing ways to tell stories around fire. The less romantic explanation is that mapmakers frequently solve the problem of empty space with imagination, as if the world's margins needed to be filled out so the globe would not wobble. There is comfort in balance, even when the universe has no particular interest in it. Pyramids under the ice are popular because pyramids everywhere are popular. Triangles are the shape that tries least and still looks accomplished. Photos of isolated triangular nunataks go viral every few years like perennials in a digital garden. The phenomenon involves wind direction carving the snow into slopes and the stone underneath taking an opinionated stand. If the photograph is taken in late light, the triangle sharpens, and suddenly there is a city. Not an entire city, just the respectable corner of one, which is enough for enthusiasm to go shopping for theories. People mention Atlantis as if it left a forwarding address on a piece of shale. Others nominate Lemuria, which was invented to explain animals that later turned out to be perfectly capable swimmers. Occasionally, the conversation jumps off the furniture and suggests visitors from elsewhere, because empty places attract big ideas the way empty rooms make echoes sound wiser than they are. History, patient as an anemometer in a calm sent ships. The German Schwabenland expedition in 1938-39 launched flying boats by catapult, which feels like overkill until you remember they were trying to fling aircraft into the cold with panache. The photographs were careful and grainy, full of coastline doing ordinary coastline things. After the war, Operation High Jump brought an extravagant fleet to the ice. Ships, aircraft, bulldozers, sledges, cooks, medics, and a quantity of socks that would make a mill proud. The official mission was practical equipment testing, training, mapping. Unofficially, it would become a future buffet for rumor, which never turns down free carbohydrates. The logs from High Jump are charmingly mundane. Fuel drums are chastised for freezing. Anchors are bored. Men note the exact hour when soup became the right temperature. In flight reports, the word whiteout repeats with the regularity of a lullaby. Years later, as increasingly inventive stories clung to the operation, these same logs would sit politely on library shelves, perplexed that anyone was bored enough to invent something more dramatic. Then the truth that diesel gets sulky at minus 30 bases followed like punctuation along the rim of the continent. Little huts on stilts learned quickly how clever snow can be, arriving from upwind and stacking its votes until doors became memories. Field crews flagged routes with bamboo poles and plastic. Streamers party decorations for the world's least social party. The British gave their enterprise the nightclub name Operation Tabarin, as if the huts danced after curfew. The Soviets dropped Vostok in the middle of nowhere with the seriousness of a chess move. Beneath it slept a lake with the personality of a locked diary. Americans spread across McMurdo and the pole with boxy buildings that looked like Lego remembered its dreams. Daily life included thawing butter with stern looks, negotiating with generators, and escaping the weather by reading the same book so many times the pages grew friendly. Occasionally, someone named a tracked vehicle Pissin Bully and smiled at how cute metal can be, Restricted zones today are mostly the practical kind, although the imagination never thanks you for saying so. You keep people away from a penguin rookery because penguins already have enough to worry about, and their worries involve krill, not you. You protect historic huts because the biscuit tins still sit on the shelves, and the air inside smells faintly of the past trying to keep a straight face. You avoid certain crevasse fields because the snow covers them like a polite tablecloth over a yawning mouth. These reasons are unsatisfying if what you crave is intrigue, but they are very good if what you crave is everyone returning from a ski with the same number of ankles they started with. A red outline on a map, regrettably, throws a better party in the mind than a paragraph about safety protocols. People love a secret door, even when the door is only keeping the wind out of old wood. Science asks questions with a kindness that takes years. Radar hums through the ice and returns with polite sketches of mountains hidden beneath. The gambit solves, as shy as introverts at a crowded wedding. Ice cores rise from boreholes in elegant white cylinders like time packaged by a meticulous clerk. Inside the cores, bubbles of atmosphere from centuries when nobody had invented the word internet, layers of volcanic ash thinner than eyelashes, and gossip about temperatures written in isotopes that behave beautifully in graphs. Neutrino detectors under the ice watch for particles that do not care about your opinions, passing through the earth as carelessly as they pass through everything else. From all this patience comes a portrait of the continent as something alive, moving a few meters a year in the direction gravity prefers, cracking, freezing, thawing a little, complaining faintly in frequencies you might mistake for the building settling. The portrait does not include blueprints for a city. It does include the exact oxygen content of the air when mammoths were working out their social calendar. And yet, the other portrait, drawn in brighter colors and thicker lines, has its own rhythm. Photographs circulate with circles drawn on them. A triangle becomes a temple. A straight line becomes a runway. Someone mentions a post-war paperclip that allegedly secured more than stationery. Another person wonders about a lake beneath Vostok, so isolated it might as well be a planet, and then suggests, very gently, that planets have visitors. The words cover up and reveal take turns like polite children sharing a toy. It is hard to argue with a good story when the background is an expanse famously reluctant to contradict you. After all, the continent has only one facial expression. It is a masterpiece of deadpan. Between these narratives lives the day-to-day charm of the place, which is what most residents end up remembering. The sun spirals low in summer and refuses to set, behaving like a guest who insists they are just about to leave and then asks for one more biscuit. In winter, twilight grinds slowly toward night and stops halfway to listen to the aurora. Weddell seals sing through the ice in voices that sound like someone's modem learned to feel feelings. A flag line creaks. A door claps. In the galley, there is always a kettle moving toward the boil like a suspense novel with no crime. Someone is measuring the snow crystal shapes with the attention usually reserved for calligraphy. Someone else is trying to persuade bread dough to rise in air that is mostly composed of the concept of cold. These details are not secret. They are not even urgent. They are the opposite of intrigue, which is precisely why they are better at keeping you company in the dark dot. So what to do with the hidden city? Perhaps think of it as an excellent bedtime story that the ice tells about us. We come to a blank page and politely fill it with hallways. We watch the wind carve a ridge and call it a roof. We project our love of corners and doors onto a place that mostly offers curves and locks. Every few years, a new photograph suggests an entrance, and we, obliging, bring flashlights. Scientists explain again about sastrugi and shadow length, and the ways that sensors exaggerate when the sun behaves like a lamp set too far to the side. Conspiracy theorists explain again about maps that remember too much, missions that brought too many socks, zones that prefer privacy. The conversation repeats, which is secretly the most soothing part. Repetition is a blanket. The mind pulls it up to its chin and sighs if there is a city, and it is hard to be against cities on principle. It is very patient. Imagine boulevards arranged on bedrock, everything softened by pressure and time into a relief map only radar can read. Imagine a library full of air older than agriculture, shelves of bubbles murmuring about carbon dioxide. Imagine ponds black as tea under the ice, the bacteria attending to their unimaginably slow chores, happy in their tiny, unadvertised ways. Imagine doorways that are simply changes in density, corridors that only exist to instruments, apartments rented out to cold itself. You can imagine all this with your eyes closed, which is both the cheapest and the kindest method of exploration. And if there is not a city, there remains a continent with a gift for silence. That gift is unusual enough to feel like a discovery. Walk a little in your head. You cross a flat so white that the idea of color takes a brief vacation. Your breath makes small clouds and then decides not to. The horizon is a stubborn straight line that seems to be telling you to get some rest. You hear your boots complaining about their job. In the distance, a building of snow blocks keeps its square shoulders despite the wind's persuasive speeches. You return indoors, and the door shuts with a soft thud that announces civilization better than a statue ever could. A kettle clicks. A page turns. The diesel generator hums like a contented refrigerator. Outside, the wind rearranges the same drifts again, for the pleasure of doing the same task twice. The truth, whatever size and shape it eventually decides to wear, does not need to arrive quickly. Most truths in the polar regions travel by sledge. They stop often for tea. Sometimes they turn back because the weather changed its mind. In the meantime, triangles will keep appearing when the sun is low, and lines will keep arranging themselves into straightness that begs for an explanation that feels human. And you can let them. You can let the photos be little riddles that the wind writes for practice. You can let the arguments continue without you, like a radio left on in another room, fuzzy, friendly, almost musical. You can let your breath slow to the pace of a glacier, and your thoughts follow behind like penguins, neat and unhurried until the city lost, hidden, or never built at all becomes exactly what you need it to be tonight. A soft outline behind the eyelids, with a door that never quite has to open. You might not expect a continent that is essentially a very serious snowdrift to have property rumors, but Antarctica has been accused of keeping a city. Not a lively one with commuters and coffee queues, just a polite arrangement of imaginary buildings pressed beneath miles of ice like paperwork in a cold filing cabinet. The landscape encouraged the idea by being strangely earnest about surfaces. Snow falls, becomes fern, becomes ice, like someone steadily upgrading mattresses. The wind arranges the skin of the place into corrugations called sastrugi that look like the planet tried to comb once and like the result. Sunlight rarely stands overhead. It prefers to glide sideways, making every bump a confident line and every line an architectural decision. From orbit, sensors blink awake and translate shadows into pixels. And pixels, like bored attendants, start whispering about triangles. A ridge looks like a wall if the light is dramatic, and the light here is a tireless dramaturg. Somewhere, a satellite pass catches 3 dark wedges in flattering alignment, and suddenly there is a rumor with good posture. If you're still awake by the time I start describing the average speed of katabatic winds in meters per second, feel free to subscribe or don't. I will never know, and the wind is not keeping score. Spend a few minutes with a map, and the blankness begins to smuggle in details. The names themselves are sleepy entertainment. There's the Edmundson Sea, calm as a librarian, and the Ross Ice Shelf, which is not a shelf at all, but a very slow table. There are the Transantarctic Mountains, so buried you have to meet them halfway with radar. like neighbors who prefer correspondence to conversation. The cold keeps its own calendar. Tools complain, then adapt. Diesel thickens until it seems to possess convictions. A cup of tea goes from too hot to nostalgic steam in the time it takes to say insulated mug with a wool hat on. The human eye, under this patient weather, develops hobbies. It starts finding angles in agreeable places, non-attacks shaped like neat pyramids, blue ice patches trimmed as if by ruler, snow ramps with strangely persuasive symmetry. We are naturally generous with patterns. Show us even a hint of 90 degrees and we will build a hallway around it. You can blame pareidolia, the brain's habit of joining dots that have never been introduced. But honestly, the habit is charming. A continent this quiet invites speculation the way an empty page invites margin doodles. The whisper becomes a sentence. Perhaps there is a structure under there. Perhaps many. Perhaps they arranged themselves with boulevard discipline, and then the ice arrived with one long, polite shit. Eventually the suspicion wanders from physics into folklore as comfortably as a penguin waddling from surf to snow. People remember old maps that seemed to draw Antarctica before anyone could see it. The pure erase map, stitched from sailor stories in 1513, appears at parties whenever lost continents are discussed, which is more often than one would guess. The Erroneous Phineas map from 1531 makes an even bolder claim, giving the South a river system that is satisfyingly tidy, rather as if someone who liked fountains had been consulted. Cartographic historians explain that 16th century mapmakers disliked leaving space unadorned. They were the kind of people who filled in margins with sea monsters because an octopus is excellent company for an empty ocean. But triangles are persuasive, and so are legends. Atlantis attends, slightly overdressed as usual, and Lemuria waves from the doorway, wondering if anyone remembered to invite it. The modern rumor includes satellite images with rings drawn on them, arrows pointing to features that look suspiciously like rocks. Meanwhile, a geologist clears their throat and mentions regular processes: freeze, thaw, compression, flow, sunlight at low angles, performing its favorite trick of turning the ordinary into the architectural. This explanation is not less beautiful, but it is less dramatic, which is often the same thing at great distance. Then, like a patient footnote in Boots, history arrives with expeditions whose names feel both practical and theatrical. The German Schwabenland expedition of 1938-39 launched flying boats off catapults, a sentence that sounds made up until you see a photograph and realize the past had a gift for earnest extravagance. The pilots mapped coastlines that, from above, behave like coastlines confused, repetitious, honest. The British organized Operation to Bahrain during the war and gave their huts the look of stubborn shipping crates. You can still walk into some of them and see tins stacked on shelves, as if tea time stepped out and never returned. After the war, the Americans filled the water with ships and called it Operation High Jump, a name that suggests a gym class, but involved more socks than any gym class has ever contemplated. The logs from High Jump are wonderfully unromantic. Navigation fixes, weather complaints, notes about snow that kept replacing itself with identical snow, and precise records of when soup behaved. If you put your ear close to the pages, you can almost hear the diesel generator humming a modest melody. Later, much later, people would attach pilot legends and improbable encounters to the operation like holiday ornaments. But the documents themselves remain stubbornly specific. Someone counted fuel drums, which were many. Someone measured cloud height, which was low. Someone wrote whiteout, and then wrote it again and again, as if practicing minimalism. Modern bases grew like punctuation around the rim and in the interior. McMurdo, composed of purposeful rectangles, is the semicolon of the South. Not quite a stop, not quite a go. Vostok sits so far from everything that nearest neighbor is a rhetorical flourish. Beneath it lies a lake that has been quietly not mixing with the rest of the world for more than 1,000,000 years. The South Pole Station, with its elevated modules, looks like a person who learned how to stand on tiptoe to avoid drifts. Field camps sprout bamboo flags and rope lines that mumble their way across white flats. There is nothing like seeing a square of plywood shiver in the wind to remind you that architecture is usually a negotiation with atmosphere. Restrictions exist and always sound more interesting than they are. Some areas are preserved because old huts behave like artifacts every time someone breathes on them. Others keep humans away because penguins deserve personal space. Crevasse zones receive little red outlines on maps because gravity remains persuasive. These are not mysterious reasons. They are the practical kind, the sort that keep ankles intact and history dusty in the correct way. Still, a red line incites a certain itch in the imagination. A keep out sign, wherever you put it, is like a bell that rings only in the mind, which is the art of looking carefully for a very long time, keeps polishing its lenses on the ice. Planes drag radar across the surface and sketch hidden mountain ranges, the gamberts off, so shy they live beneath 2 kilometers of ice like well-mannered introverts. Ice cores rise from boreholes in white columns as precise as a tidy person's thoughts. In the cylinders are bubbles of old air that disapprove of modern parties, layers of volcanic ash thinner than a whisper, and the faint chemistry of winters when mammoths were respectfully minding their own business. There is also the neutrino observatory buried in the ice, which waits for particles that pass through everything the way opinion passes through polite conversation. None of these instruments report boulevards, parking decks, or a municipal tax office. They report the very boring, very miraculous operations of a planet doing its slow work. If there is a hidden city, it is the city of glaciology, rivers that creep at the speed of stories told by grandfathers, roofs that sag by microns, streets where snow grains grow like quiet crystals practicing social distancing. And still, despite this patient bookkeeping, the myth refuses to find the exit. A triangle in a photo is always ready for its encore. The debate between conspiratorial enthusiasm and practical patience proceeds at the soporific pace of winter. On one side, a video zooms dramatically into pixels until the pixels become a cathedral by sheer persistence. On the other, a researcher stands outside, goggles fogging, and states for the record that the object is a rock. The rock, being a rock, declines comment. Theorists assemble a cast list, retired admirals with cryptic interviews, maps with baroque coastlines, shipping records with blank days that almost certainly involved sleep. Scientists respond with a cast list of their own, radargrams, thermal models, the way basal ice lubricates, and the fact that if you hide a city under a moving glacier for long enough, it will be advertised as modern. Art. Somewhere in the middle sits the quiet spectator, which is to say, you, listening to both sides as if there are 2 radios in neighboring rooms. It turns out that curiosity does not require conviction. You can hold the idea of a buried doorway very lightly, like a feather that is here mostly to feel like a feather. There are soft, irrelevant facts that make the continent friendlier while the arguments circle each other like patient skaters. At McMurdo, people speak fondly of freshies on resupply days, meaning lettuce that has not known the inside of a freezer. At the pole, shadows are so long that even a wrench looks philosophical. Snow crystals have species, or at least personalities, plates and columns and dendrites. That would make excellent wallpaper if they were not so interested in melting. Crews keep journals where the most common sentence is, "Today the wind decided to be itself," which is the polar equivalent of small talk. The aurora does not ask your opinion. It is busy. Weddell seals singing under the ice sound like an old modem trying to dream. Even the generators have nicknames, as if reliability improves with familiarity. None of this disproves a hidden city. It simply lengthens the list of gentle reasons to be here without one, and still, rumors love a good coat. They wrap themselves in words like forbiddance and underground and disclosure. Someone, somewhere, points to a restricted zone and declares certainty. Another someone quietly mentions that large forklifts and deep crevasses are a poor combination, and that is the beginning and end of the mystery. It is not the most exciting explanation, which is why it sleeps so well. There's a tiny comedy to this, in the way a locked door in a museum keeps out drafts, and in doing so, inadvertently guards a new mythology. The door cannot win. If it is open, the room is boring. If it is closed, the room is important. The best the door can do is continue being a door while people tell stories to each other in the gift shop when you are very tired, as polar workers often are, and as listeners sometimes become in the late blue hours of evening. The difference between the possible and the probable softens into a blanket. It becomes pleasant to imagine a corridor under the ice that exists only for instruments and dreams. The floors are made of density changes. The walls are made of historical data. The lamps are bubbles of greenhouse gases politely refusing to pop. You can walk there without putting on boots. You can gaze at a stairwell made entirely of isotopes. A librarian made of radar waves shuffles along the stacks, returning one layer of snowfall to the right ear. A janitor made of gravity comes by now and then to make sure the glacier is flowing in the correct direction, which is generally north, which is also generally downhill. None of this harms anyone. The wind approves because the wind appreciates a narrative that does not require it to stop. What we know that stays interesting is that Antarctica is excellent at keeping time. Its ice is an archive that no city planner could design, even if the planner was very patient and very fond of chronological order. There are summers preserved in thin, bright lines, and winters preserved in modest opacity. There are eras when the sea sighed a little higher than now, and eras when it sulked a little lower. In a way, this is the grandest secret the continent offers, that it has been listening for a long time, and that the record it keeps is a kind of music. If you are awake enough to listen closely, the tune is about dust and salt and volcanic ash and the slow arithmetic of snow. If you are not awake enough, the tune is about warm blankets and windows that do not rattle. Both versions are correct. It is tempting, I know, to request a finale where someone finds a door, where a drone slides into a passage and reveals staircases and inscriptions, maybe a cafeteria with surprisingly good acoustics. But even if such a video appeared, the continent would not react. The wind would continue moving paperwork from one dune to the next. A flag would stand at the edge of a camp, humming to itself in a language of canvas and rope. A person would write whiteout again in a logbook because the weather remains fond of repeating its favorite trick. And a penguin, busy with its pebble accounting, would not change its mind about krill. The hidden city would either be real and exceedingly quiet, or imaginary and exceedingly useful for passing the time between meals. In both cases, the generator would keep purring, the water would keep boiling, and the night would continue discovering new shades of blue dot. So if you are still listening, let your thoughts wander like a field party on a day when the horizon is very officially in charge. Consider the straight lines in a photo and let them be buildings for a moment, then let them be snow again. Neither state minds. Think of a ship anchored to fast ice while a cook debates whether soup can be both hot and interesting. It can. Imagine a mapmaker in 1531 filling a pale corner of the world with tidy rivers because blank pages make the hand itch. It does. Picture a scientist at a drill site quietly labeling bags of ancient air, the handwriting neat even with gloves on. It is. Between these tiny scenes runs the long, unhurried conversation that has always followed Antarctica, Rumor speaks. Data replies. Rumor speaks again. Both parties agree to meet next century. There's no need to decide anything tonight. The continent is patient, and the story will be there in the morning, like a trail of bamboo flags crossing the snow, pointing nowhere in particular, and also, in their honest way, pointing home.